Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is what's hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner. Well, we're here this morning with Matt Fleming, a coworker of mine, in fact, principal solution architect for Power Platform and the CE modules of Dynamics 365 at Boyer & Associates. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me on, Merlin.
But of course, and everyone else, I'm not the only one having you on, in fairness. So what we're going to talk about today is Azure DevOps. And as Liz and Ashley and I have mentioned a number of times in a variety of our podcast episodes, oh yeah, ADO, Azure DevOps, you should use that. It's cool. But we haven't really talked that much about it, what it is, what it does, how it works, what you can do with it. And so we decided that we would bring in an expert today. So Matt, I hope that you're ready for that title of expert in ADO. To talk
if not, you now have it.
Yeah.
Sweet.
You can add that to
I'll
your
do
LinkedIn
my best
profile.
to not disappoint.
Excellent. So I guess to begin with, how would you describe what Azure DevOps is and what it's good for?
It's a big question. I would say the way that I've used it in the past, it's really a tool that helps to support Agile teams and Agile development framework. So hopefully the listeners have some familiarity with what exactly that is. But when you kind of break that down a little bit, it helps us plan our work. It helps us track the work that we do on a daily basis. It can help us control the source code behind some of the customizations and those types of things that we're making in CRM. And then you can kind of go all the way to the end and really do automated deployments in there, which is pretty cool. Since if you are an admin or have dealt with solution imports ever, it kind of gets old fast, right? So it's kind of rinse and repeat. That's something that can be easily packaged up and put inside of DevOps to go ahead and take care of kind of those menial tasks for you too. So.
And that's pretty sweet. If we start back sort of at the beginning on, it helps you track your work on a daily basis. I guess why, so it's come up in a previous episode that I'm a big fan of putting things in OneNote. So why should I use ADO instead of just making a list in OneNote of stuff I should do?
I think there's at a high level, it's an easy way to actually tie stuff together. I know that I've got a million different OneNotes and I always end up not knowing where I put stuff in OneNote. So it's just a good way to be able to track things inside of a system.
I mean, it's more structured data.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's more structured. We also, if Merlin gets hit by a bus, there's that whole discussion or
wins the lottery.
Point about
That's
everything.
more positive than getting hit by a bus.
So
Don't
for
worry,
some
as
reason,
I lay there
Merlin,
bleeding, I'll be texting, here's where my OneNote is.
grant access.
Top priority.
So there's that. The other thing I always think about is my future self. I have a terrible memory. So, I think about how when we do stuff inside of Azure DevOps, when we track our work, when we explain what we're doing clearly there, the next time that, Ashley or Liz comes as the end user that we're helping to support and says, hey, process XYZ is broken or process XYZ needs to change, I can go and look back in DevOps and pretty easily find the area that we, defined as work there and what we did for the solution. So
I have so many questions based on what you've said, but so internally at my company, we use Jira. So would you say that's a competitor, similar? I mean, are there things about ADO that are different and make it a better tool?
I don't have tons of experience on the Jira side. Definite competitor though, probably the biggest one. So
okay.
Actually, I've used both, and I don't know like on a detailed level like if one is better in a certain area than the other, but like essentially they're equivalent from what I've seen.
Okay. The other question I had is like reporting. And so Liz, you had mentioned like it's just a data, better way to like keep your data. What kind of reporting can you pull out of ADO? And I'm probably jumping like super far ahead, but
yeah. So there is built-in functionality inside of ADO where you can, build some dashboards out, those types of things. If you need to go, to that second level, you can definitely get at the data and put stuff into Power BI to make more complex reports or mash stuff up with, let's say you manage projects in CRM or something like we do here at Boyer. You can kind of manage or marry those two systems up together. There is a lot that you can do there. One of the biggest implementations that I ever worked on for an end user was a company that has 15,000 employees roughly or something like that, multiple hundreds in their development teams. And they got a new CTO while I was there, and they actually standardized everything into ADO kind of being their work tracking place. And then that same VP kind of standardized the dashboard with, I need to see X, Y, and Z on every team's dashboard. So he could walk into any meeting and kind of see the things that were important to him on that higher technical level. So I thought that was kind of neat. Teams are obviously free to go and customize stuff and, add to things, but, he wanted to see how many bugs were being created on a weekly basis, how many things were getting resolved on a weekly basis, those types of things. So high level stats, but then they could kind of customize those dashboards to their liking too. So
have you used the reporting from like a burn down chart perspective or like a capacity planning perspective?
Not so much. We did a lot of like the implementations I've used it on. We've kind of operated more in the Azure Kanban type space where it's kind of not so heavily focused on the burn down stuff as much as it is on pull the next item out of the backlog and get it done. So,
okay.
So we definitely have used it for, I guess in that case, the thing that becomes more important. And I think it's important in just the traditional Agile framework too, is kind of your metric that you're tracking there is your velocity. How many points are you accomplishing in each of your sprints, kind of a thing. So. It's a lot
of Go ahead, Liz.
I was going to ask, so you're referring to story points when you say that?
Mm-hmm.
So is that how you typically estimate, or have you had, because we've just talked about this before in previous episodes of what are story points and what are the other options for estimating? So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Right. Yeah. So if you're following the framework, story points is kind of the way to go. What are story points? They're just a level of effort, an estimation of effort that you assign to a body of work when you don't know everything that you need to know about it. So generally when you're doing story pointing, you're doing it at a high level. You can do it, there's the concept inside of Agile of epics, features, and user stories. You can kind of point at all three of those levels. Obviously with an epic, that's a bigger body of work. So it's something that you're going to throw big numbers at, probably only have 3 or 4 different numbers that you might even assign to an epic. Feature, you might, get a little bit more granular and detailed. So that number might be smaller. You might have a few more options to choose from. And then you get kind of all the way down to that user story level. And the teams that I've been on where we've used this, we've used what they call the Fibonacci sequence. So you kind of 1, 2, 4, 8, 12, and then I think 20. And that's kind of where you kind of cut things off. So you can't have things that are too big as, the size that they're in. So a user story should be under probably 12 points most of the time.
And if they're too large, they should be broken into separate items, right?
Either broken into separate items or moved up into, promoted into a higher level item, like a feature in that case or something like that, that then you would come back and break down later. So, so that's kind of what story points are. One of the biggest difficulties is kind of everybody at some points wants to try to tie story points and dollars back together, because that's how our brains work. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard to do, because really with story pointing, what you're supposed to be doing is meeting and doing backlog refinements. You're supposed to play a game of poker or something like that, where everyone is kind of getting their turn and their opportunity to kind of estimate the work, right? So you're doing this in a team setting. You've got 3 or 4 people doing it. trying to agree on what the number is actually going to be. So as you do that, depending on the level of detail that you have on everything, and then the people that are on your team, you're going to kind of get your own velocity, So I mentioned that team at that large enterprise client that we had. Every one of those teams had a different velocity. Some of them were doing 20 points a week, and some of them were doing 130 points a week. But the volume of work that 20-point team could be doing might actually be more. They might be introducing more features for the products that they support. So it's kind of a tricky thing to kind of talk through and talk around, but
how long, like if an organization is trying to do this for the first time, like how do you have any recommendations of how to get started effectively, or like how long it takes to kind of get a handle on it if it's brand new?
Yeah, I would say start small. I think that's a big key. So we're in the process of starting to use this for all of our internal stuff at Boyer, on the CRM side of things. And really right now we're not necessarily highly focused on even pointing stuff right now, because the team doesn't have a ton of Agile experience and Agile development experience. So just start using the system. Don't put pressure on yourself, because you're not going to know how you want to use it as a team. And that's the big thing. I think that's the first principle of Agile is people over process, right? So figure out what you as a team need to do and how to use the system, what levels of detail you need to get to, and don't do too much at first. Just get your stuff in there, focus on trying to understand and agree upon what an epic actually is, what a feature is, and what a user story is. Once you have that agreed upon, focus on getting just even titles into there of each of those different things. Once you feel comfortable with that, then start trying to further define those things, I would say. And then as you kind of go through, you can introduce planning and those other different ceremonies inside of Agile as you get more familiar and comfortable.
I think that's such a great point. I've been on projects before where they assume that like Azure DevOps is used the same way in every project or every organization. So they're like, oh, it. And there's no discussion up front of like, how are we going to use this, or how do we define these things, or like, what does this mean to this team? And it's not really effective, when you don't have a common understanding of like, this is how we're going to use it.
Yep. Yeah. And so I think that's one of those things where like, it kind of ties back very closely to consulting with me, because a lot of the time, end users that haven't worked with consultants before, they want to know the answer to a question. And a lot of the times there's not one answer. There's many different answers.
Rarely is there one answer.
Right. It's more a discussion of, okay, how do we want to get there? What's the best way to do it for your organization? And that's definitely central to successfully using ADO. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because like I said, my company uses Jira, or our tech team, I should say, uses Jira for a lot of our, we just call them projects. We don't really do user story. And if we do user stories, it's not like on a global scale. But I've actually rolled out ADO just for Dynamics and the Power Platform. So any projects that we're going to do on that side will get tracked in there. And I was very overwhelmed, like opening it up, trying to compare it to Jira. So I think that is a good call out, Matt, that you said, is like start small, like define how you're going to use epics, define how you're going to do this, don't because I was like, yeah, I want to get into doing pointing and story points and stuff. There's no way on my first two things that I've put in there that I would even know, because I want to be able to prove to people like, this is the t-shirt size of what this effort takes, but I don't really know how to quantify that yet.
Right. Yeah. And the big thing to remember is it's not just you either, right? So Agile is very focused on developing in a team-oriented environment. So you might have, as a leader in your IT space, in the CRM space, you might have 7 different teams, if you're in a big organization, or 3 different teams of people, or maybe you just have, a team of you and a couple different developers. But the big deal there is you're having conversations as a team. You're doing refinement sessions where you're talking about what these particular requirements are. And really shedding light on some things that you, in your higher level conversations, probably either didn't think about, or, you're just getting a different perspective on things. So the team that we implemented at that large client we had a team of 5 here in the United States that participated in our pointing sessions. And I think on a weekly basis, I left that meeting just being so appreciative of the fact that there's so many different viewpoints on how you define something, right? And you realize real quickly too, when you start to do that on that user story type level, that you're probably not as good of a communicator as you think you are. Because I cannot tell you how many times I'm like, okay, bang it out, put in all these requirements into there. And then you get these random, just out of left field questions where it's like, I never even thought about that. But that's a really, really good question that we couldn't do the work if we didn't know the answer to it. So
what I love is that you think that as at an end user, I have a team to like work on dynamics when it's really just me as a leader, but also like I'm the only person that works on dynamics. So I think it's adorable that you guys as consultants and partners think that end users have more than one person.
Actually, your team can consist of your consultants. Like you can have a hybrid team and be an ADO together working.
I just like to tease you guys because like it really is just me.
And most people are like that. But the idea is to grow the team, right?
Well, so. Yeah, because I know more one-man shops and people switch partners so often these days that like tracking stuff like this, I think is probably more important than ever.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you do it right, it's one of those things where when you're in the consulting space, it's always how much documentation do you do? People don't ever want to pay for documentation. It's a big pain in the rear to actually do the documentation because things change. Like I said, I just talked about the whole question out of left field that you don't have the answer to until you maybe start building in the case that you're not actually trying to point this and talk to and refine things. Right. So it's a nice system where you can kind of pull everything out of there. If you do it right, you shouldn't be writing in technical terms a lot of the time in ADO either. Maybe on like the task level, you're writing in technical terms, but a lot of the times what you should be doing is describing business process, business functionalities, the user story. The age old template is, as a CRM user, I want some piece of functionality so that I can do my job. Right. And if you do things in that way, so coming from the consulting world, if I've got something in ADO for a particular client and they decide they don't want to work with us anymore and they ask for documentation, I can ship them all the stuff. Then here's all the epics, features, and user stories that we accomplished while we were working with you. So
yeah, so like your point is that you shouldn't need kind of the traditional waterfall type of documentation if you're using ADO and doing Agile effectively, that is your documentation.
Which Liz and I have talked about how much we loved writing those 40-page Word documents.
40 is really short.
I think I heard that episode.
Yeah, that's not my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, and I think, so being here at Boyer over the last year, I've realized that there's a big difference. And I've always known this, but there's a big difference between like a Business Central ERP type of an implementation and a CRM implementation. CRM is very business driven, where a lot of the times ERPs, yes, there's business processes in there, but at the end of the day, you're kind of lining this all up so it goes out onto a balance sheet and onto those financial documents that have to be right so you can file your taxes and all that stuff, right? So
I think financial rules don't change from company to company, like the way you conduct business.
Especially within an industry, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, some of the guts in the middle of like, okay, what happens to a product when it comes into a warehouse and blah, blah, blah. Those types of things still change and whatnot, but there's a lot less variance there where, working with end users in the CRM space, it's like, it's wide open, it's trying to figure out what the most important things to the business are, what the KPIs we're trying to actually understand and track are, right? And that can change, from one week to the next. Ashley, I'm talking to Ashley about something. She says X, Y, and Z. Then she goes to her boss. And before you know it, boss man says, no, that's not at all what I want. I want you to do this. And this is the most important thing in the world right now. Right. So getting that 50-page document out there does absolutely nothing for us except for kind of helps us burn some time. Right.
I'd love to see how many pages we get up to by the end of this conversation. I started with 40, Matt went to 50. See how high we go.
My favorite part about writing 80-page documents is that I think, and this is where I like tracking something in a system, whether it's ADO or not, where you can get kind of the change over time. Mm-hmm. So like one of the things that I've seen, this is in the long ago, using a totally different tool that I don't remember what the name of it was. the customer would track like feature requests and bugs into, their system that was similar to ADO. And then you could put all these comments on it, right? So you'd be like, oh, well, we think we're going to solve it this way. And then you can have another comment like, actually, we decided we're going to do it this way. And here's why. And now 6 months down the road, when somebody's like, well, why did you build it that way? If you're just looking at your 85-page document,
or
you're like, or OneNote, and you're like, I don't know. All I wrote down is that this is what it's supposed to do, but I don't know why it's doing it that way. And I remember us talking about doing it a different way, but I don't remember why we didn't do it like that. If you have something in ADO with kind of that conversation on it, then you can say, oh, here's why we did it that way. Here's the context of that decision. Yeah,
this goes back to that whole future me thing and having a bad memory, because everyone deals with 1,000 things on a daily basis. So it's like you do run into that thing and you say, okay, we got to make a judgment call here. You make the judgment call, and 6 months later, you absolutely don't remember why.
And we do that all the time with like Dataverse or CRM projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll say 10 years ago, like I feel like I remembered everything, like from all the passwords, everything, but CRM was also smaller. Do you know what I mean? So
you're
like
also older now.
Yeah, you were also younger, actually.
No, so I think it's twofold. 100% agree. Like if I don't write it down on a sticky note, you guys make fun of me, but I've got, even traveling, you guys can tell I'm in a different place. I still have my stickies on my laptop. But I think it's different now because like everything is so much bigger than what it used to be. You only had so many options to complete something 10 years ago in CRM of 2011. Now today with the whole Dataverse Power Platform, I mean, you have so many different ways to accomplish the goal that like keeping track of why you made that decision will really help you in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amen. Preach.
Yeah.
Well, and even if it's not you remembering, it might be like the admin who made those decisions doesn't work there anymore. Like that person made all those decisions and now they're gone. And nobody else in the organization has any clue why they made those choices. So
and people move around so much these days too.
And it's usually a one-man shop, right? There's one admin.
Right, there's one Ashley.
Right.
And the partners don't document as well as we would all love them to. So getting everybody into Azure DevOps is fantastic. I'm sorry, but they don't. I mean, I walk into companies, the first thing I ask for is documentation from the partners, and they're like, oh yeah, we have that somewhere.
Another reason why it's not worth spending the money to write it.
I was just gonna say that's it, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask like kind of a setup question before we get too much more into like the meat of ADO. So I know when you're setting up a new ADO project, Matt, you have to pick the template and you can have a custom template as well. Do you have any sort, and that affects some of the terminology of the types of work items. So like not every template calls a user story. Like I know there's some other names to it. So I was curious if you had any recommendations or if you have a preference on which template is better or why.
So what we're using internally on the CRM side at Boyer is the Agile template. I made a custom template out of it just because I wanted to add some fields and those types of things to it. So best practice, don't modify the template at that base level, create a new one and, add what you need to there is what I would say. As far as the other templates, there are ones that are more, built more for traditional waterfall type projects. Never used them because I'm all about Agile. So
I know there's an Agile and a Scrum template. Like, do you know anything about the differences between those two? By the names of them, I feel like they both would be for Agile projects.
They are, yeah. And the Scrum, I think they call a user story. I think they call it a PBI or a product backlog item. So there's some terminology changes, but it's really, no matter which template that you choose to use, you still have the high level core concepts of work items. So epics, features, PBIs, user stories, issues, bugs, testing, feedback, yada, 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 right? A work item is just anything that somebody might work on, right? So you still have those concepts. You still got the concept of, boards where you can go left to right. You can have the little cards on the board for each of those work items. You move left to right. You still have the code repository behind it. You still have all the deployment options, all of that stuff. It's kind of just more, what does your team feel comfortable with as far as terminology goes, And do you want to take on that change of trying to get people to use new terminology when you're rolling out a new system, right? So how much change is the right amount?
It's true. If we could just discuss those work items briefly, because this is something that I guess I am presently struggling with on our internal rollout of ADO is what's an epic versus a feature versus a user story, like
versus a task.
versus a task, which I don't even think I've created a task. I'm just create user stories and features and occasionally epics. And I'm always like a little bit unsure, like, is this too detailed? This is not detailed enough. Like, I don't really know.
So I actually have a blog open about this particular topic on my desktop right now.
A blog that you wrote?
No.
Oh, I was gonna say he knew you were gonna ask, Marilyn.
So we can share this. You guys have show notes or something like that we can drop this into.
Yeah, that'd
perfect.
Be great.
So we'll drop something in there about it, but epic, feature, user story, and task, kind of top to bottom as far as granularity goes, right? So to get really technical on it, like what Agile would describe an epic as, or ADO would, a high level business initiative that you need to do. So really big, right?
You might even have just one epic per project, right?
It's definitely possible. Yeah. So, right now we've got a couple projects where we're implementing them where we have maybe 1 or 2 epics. And then we've got another one where we're going to have like 12 because it's bigger,
Sure.
So the thing for that 12, like we're going to have epics there's 3 different sales processes that we're implementing: a business to business, a resale, and then I don't remember what the other one is, but those are all going to kind of be their own separate epics. Then those would have features inside of them. So that's more so like an actual feature of the system is kind of what we're saying, right? So something inside of D365 or Power Platform. So inside of those sales processes, it might just be something like opportunity management. It might be, lead to opportunity process, like what that looks like, where you're kind of trying again to use business speak so that you can kind of understand, because that's how we all kind of process everything. I think ultimately is everything is really process driven, right? So we know that inside the sales process, the user is going to have to eventually take a lead. It's going to have to be converted over into an opportunity. So then underneath that feature there, you can have the different things that you want to describe. So what does it look like maybe when what do we have to do before a lead closes? So maybe there's some KPI on lead source or something like that. So an opportunity so that you can understand kind of where an opportunity comes from, those types of things, right? So on that user story level, it's more informal and kind of natural language description of that. So as a CRM user, I want to be able to understand the lead source so that I can tie that back together when an opportunity closes or something like that. So
that makes sense.
Frog in the throat. Last, we have tasks. On most of the implementations I've ever done, tasks are kind of a free-for-all. Excuse me, where kind of the technical work is documented. So a lot of the time, invariably, what I end up doing is saying, okay, developer people, put in your tasks as you want to define them for this user story. So everything else kind of up to that task point, ideally, when you're functioning in a team, everyone gets to review it and see it and ask questions about it, those types of things. On that task level, it could be something as simple as just like, okay, so we have a user story for tracking the lead source. Now we have a task that says create the lead source or update the option set inside a CRM. So blah, blah, blah happens.
So I wanted to ask about tasks because I've worked at 2 different places or on 2 different projects where they've tried to like templatize the tasks. So like the first one was like table centric or entity centric, and it was like, these are the tables we need to build, or like out of the box ones. And then it was like use form, security, and like kind of all the things you have to think about from an entity or table perspective. And then the other waves I've seen it try to be standardized. And I think there's issues kind of with both approaches. Is like, okay, so we have to design, develop, test, which obviously isn't relevant for every user story either. So what are your, like, you just think it's better to leave it up to the person building?
I really think let your team decide. If you want to have some templates in there so that they can easily go and add them, they're easy to make. And so I would say make it easy on your team to do that. I've seen both of those things. The entity level stuff does not work.
Well, not everything's entity specific.
Right. We did that at my previous employer. We did a cloud migration, and that's how we did things, because we had a team that was very inexperienced on the whole Agile and ADO thing. We're humming along through the process. And then at some point there, when you've got like opportunity management as a user story, everything just blows up because you can't find anything anymore. You're not talking in terms that anyone understands. Things overlap so much that you have to kind of describe the process. One of the things that blog that I mentioned talks about too is like, when you're doing this, do a process flow document. So like do a Vizio of the whole process and make sure that everything in that process flow is either a user story or maybe a feature if it's super complex. So I thought that was kind of a good recommendation.
I love Vizio. I think I've said that before.
I would live in it all day if I could.
It's funny. I used Vizio like on the fly with somebody who was developing some other platform a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, "Oh, people still use Vizio?" I was like, all of a sudden I felt like a boomer because I'm pulling out my Vizio because it's not like, I don't know, some cool cloud like workflow platform.
We're just Microsoft centric. Vizio is a great tool. Yeah.
Because my company, they use Miro. So like they just throw some stickies and some arrows. And I'm like, no, I need my little shapes to know what I'm doing on that.
You actually use the shapes for what they're meant to be used for?
Not what they're meant to be.
Okay.
Well, so I would say like sometimes, but then I also define like for me what they should be. So
I think we're having Matt come back and talk about being an expert in Vizio then.
I'm a nerd. I have the Power Platform stencils inside my Vizio. So
love it.
Like literally drop in the little flow arrow, the Dataverse green whirly thing, whatever that thing is supposed to be. So, yep. I love the icons.
Any last questions for Matt? Anything else you guys wanted to ask about ADO before we wrap up?
I think we should talk about like automated deployment or like testing some more, kind of like the end of the process. So I think we've spent a lot of time on kind of like what I would consider the front end of like getting started with ADO.
Yeah. Yep. Again, start small. Like on the testing side of things, that's one of the big things. You can't eat a whole elephant, in one bite kind of thing. So take that same approach to testing. That's what I think any successful testing team does, is come in, identify what the most important tests are, and then figure out how to kind of figure out how to do those in an automated fashion. Right. So I kind of jumped into the deep end there. Automated testing, obviously ideas or concepts around it. You have a coder that writes something that can go and open up a Chrome browser, open up an Edge browser, and test out functionalities X, Y, and Z there, right? So,
and what sorts of things do you think should be included in automated testing?
Most critical business processes. So, it's kind of crazy to do it, but like in most organizations, if you're doing, lead to cash, something like closing an opportunity out, right? So, and you kind of what you're doing there is like, okay, go into the system, generate said opportunity, or maybe create the lead, then do the opportunity, put some fields into the opportunity, add the products or whatever, close the thing, test that your intended result is actually there. So, but again, start small. Don't test everything. Don't try to fill out a full opportunity. Only fill out the required fields. Maybe you've got some JavaScript in there that you expect to behave in a certain way to transform something when you do save an opportunity record or something like that. If that's a key piece of functionality, test that out. So it's really just the high level core stuff. And then after you do that, then you can start, getting a little fancier with the kind of testing and those types of things that you can do. I'm interested to see what happens here in the near future with like, there's this big Microsoft push for low code, no code. That really hasn't happened so much on the testing side of things. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, to see if because it's a very development driven process, very dev heavy. Like I consider myself an okay coder, and I look at test scripts and I want to die. So there's just a lot going on there.
Well, I think that's funny because I consider Microsoft's like low code option to like not be low code. Like they consider Flow or Power
Flow is no
Automate.
cliffs. It's not low code.
Oh,
No
okay.
cliffs.
I hate Power Automate. You guys all know that.
Mm-hmm. We're working on that.
Yeah.
Turn into an advocate someday.
So
what about deployment pipelines, like moving stuff between environments? And
right.
At what point does that actually make sense to do? Like, I don't know, when is it worth the effort of setting it up?
That's a good question. And that's where kind of those automated tests kind of become part of those. Like the whole reason for them is to put them into a deployment pipeline so that you can kind of have your deployment strategy. You've got a UAT environment where you push your managed solutions up to, then you're running your automated testing against that environment. And let's figure out, hey, if process X, Y, or Z is broken, we fail this thing and we don't actually deploy stuff, right? So I think kind of explaining that defines or highlights one of the benefits, right? If you've got user or automated testing built in, you can prevent bad things from going into production, right? That's a big benefit there, you know, and by bad, obviously you're not going to catch every bug, but again, the most important things to you, you can keep those processes up and running. As far as when, I mean, it is a little bit involved. Probably if you've never done it before, it'd probably take you to do a basic pipeline in there, better part of a day to do, I would think. But again, thinking about future you, if you're pushing a solution 15 times a week, you can literally automate the whole process of open up the make portal, go to the solution, export the solution, check the solution into code control, source control, import the solution into your UAT environment, make any configuration and setting changes that you need to make there, test out the AATs, now deploy to production. You can kind of automatize that whole thing. So it doesn't sound like it's that complicated when you know, because you're doing that stuff on a daily basis. But if you think about the time that you spend, Ashley, or, you know, as a consultant, I think about the time that I spend doing that stuff on a weekly basis, even it's a couple hours a week, which is big. 100 hours a year. That's, you know, so if you can knock something out in 8 hours, that's not a bad return on investment, right?
That's a good point. It's a good point.
So just looking in time, Matt, is there anything like just last that you think that we should know about ADO? Anything you want to like get on your soapbox for?
No, I guess what I would say is I would just call out the fact that if you want to use the software, start small, get comfortable with it. You're not going to be an expert in the first week. You're not going to be an expert in the first year, probably. You're probably never going to be an expert. And it's all about, you know, just collaborating with a team and figuring out what works with you and your team to do it. So just don't forget that. Keep that in mind.
That's good advice.
Yeah, it is. Thanks, Matt. Again,
we have to ask our final guest speaker.
Oh, yeah,
question.
you're right.
Yeah,
oh gosh, we haven't had a guest in so long.
I know. I was like, we're not done. Matt, what's your favorite hot dish?
God. Oh.
And we don't have to explain to Matt what a hot dish is. He's a Midwesterner. So just for everyone who's maybe listening for the first time.
So one of my favorite, you guys are going to think this is gross, I have a feeling, but one of my favorites is a Reuben hot dish, like the sandwich.
It is so not as bad as Liz's White Castle hot dish. So I think we're good.
True.
White Castle hot dish has got to be good. I've had the White Castle stuffing. That's good. So
I've never actually.
That's a whole nother topic.
It's my mother-in-law's. One time. So describe this Reuben hot dish, Matt.
So it's rye bread, corned beef hash, or not corned beef hash, corned beef, like sliced or shredded or whatever, corned beef, sauerkraut, and then you make kind of like a slurry with eggs and what else is it? It's like eggs and mustard maybe and pickles and stuff, and you kind of mix that all up together and you toss it in the oven. It's like the bread kind of sandwiches the top and the bottom, toss it in the oven, and I don't know, just comes, it's really good.
I mean,
there's no
could be good or it could be gross.
Merlin, you're laughing at me, but it's really, really good. Next time we go into the office, I'll prep it. beforehand and you can eat some.
So
I
you
could
had me at
imagine it being good.
sauerkraut.
You don't like sauerkraut?
Mm-mm, I know.
I could
Where's
imagine
the
it being
German
good.
in you?
but-
I was gonna say my German ancestors are like rolling over in their graves right now.
Mm. You should try it again. You know, they say your tastes change every 4 years.
Yeah,
So
you know, there's
you
just
might
some
like
things
it.
I don't need to try again. Awesome. Well,
Right.
thanks, Matt, for joining us. And it was a good topic, and looking forward to having you on again to talk about Vizio.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.